call to order the Iowa City City Council Economic Development Committee meeting of Friday, July 21st, 2017. Would like to welcome everybody. As usual, if we could go around and just everybody, including the audience, give names, that helps for the minutes. I'm Susan Mims, Iowa City City Council.
Eleanor Delk, City Attorney.
Simon Andrew, Assistant to the City Manager.
Wendy Ford, Economic Development Coordinator.
Jim Throgmorton, Mayor of Iowa City.
Jeff Fruin, City Manager.
Rockney Cole, City Council.
Ben Kinseth Hospitality.
Kevin Digman with Hodge Construction.
Sarah Heckdown with the City Attorney's Office.
Ian Davis with the Iowa City Press Citizen.
Ryan Sump with the Iowa City Area Chamber of Commerce.
Nancy Bird with the Iowa City Downtown District.
Mark Nolte with the Iowa City Area Development Group.
Kevin Munson with Newman Munson Architects.
Ashley Monroe, Assistant City Manager.
Gustav Stewart with the City Government.
Martha Norbeck with CY Design and Consulting.
Marissa Payne with Daily Island.
Thank you and welcome to everybody. Glad to have you here this morning. Second on the agenda is approval of minutes from the May 25th committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Motion by Cole, second by Throgmorton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. Thank you. Item number 3, consider recommendation to the City Council for the support of Hieronymus Square TIF project. Wendy, I assume you'll start us off?
Yeah, good morning. We have the developers here today for the Hieronymus Square project. Today, for your consideration, and we're asking for, specifically, we're asking for your support to recommend this to the full City Council. We have the Hieronymus Square project, a request for TIF. Let me turn the lights down here. Let's see if we can get that to happen. There, that's better. Okay. This is a project a long time in coming. In fact, when I started my job almost 11 years ago this week, the very first project I worked on was a Hieronymus Square project. And while this may be the second or third, maybe even iteration since then, this one has the most legs so far, and we're happy to present this today to you for your consideration. It is a $40.7 million project, and the developers are asking for a total of $8 million in tax increment financing support. It's located at the corner of Burlington Street and Clinton Street, and will be mixed use throughout, including having a hotel, retail space, office space, and residential units within. And I'll detail those as we go forward a little bit. In a little bit, that is. Parking also will be included in this in the underground or basement level of the entire parcel there. We've been working with developers on this site and talking about the minimum improvements that they would be required to put out there into the project, and specifically they would have a 92-unit extended stay hotel under the Element Hotel brand, which is under the Marriott companies. In that extended stay hotel, rooms are designed to support visitors who stay for extended stays, actually. So each room is equipped with a full compact kitchen. There will be the hotel amenities of a patio, pool, and fitness on the second floor. There will be access to the Court Street Transportation Center for parking for hotel guests. Recall that I had said there was parking underground underneath the entire parcel. However, that parking will be reserved for the residential component of the other building, while the developer hopes to execute an agreement similar to the ones at the Sheraton and Hotel Vetro and Hilton Garden Inn for parking, in this case, in the Court Street Transportation Center. Additionally, the hotel, in trying to meet green and sustainability hurdles, is committing to go to the gold level of the Green Seal certification, which is a third-party nonprofit environmental certification for hotels. And we're all learning a little bit more about that, so I can't tell you too many details about it now, but in working with the developers, they have indicated that that is something that they will do. In the mixed-use part of the building, which is the part of the building that is longest along Burlington Street, they will have first floor of retail, second floor of Class A office space, and the third through the seventh floors will be the residential units above, totaling right about 43 units, including 7 on-site affordable units, those being affordable to people at or below 60% of the area median income. And as I mentioned before, the 61-space garage below grade, which incidentally will be also require an agreement and some work with the Federal Transit Authority to approve access to the lower level of the Court Street Transportation Center so that entry to that lower level parking can be from the adjacent Court Street Transportation Center. And I've got a diagram that shows how that can work in the next few slides. And then for the sustainability aspects of the mixed-use portion of the building, they will do solar panels generating in excess of 38,000 kilowatt hours of electricity on top of the mixed-use portion of that. Then the third part of the building complex, so to speak, is a two-story element, maybe that's the wrong word since that's the name of the hotel, but a two-story portion of the development that will serve as an entry vestibule from the Clinton Street side. And I've got photos or renderings going forward to show you how that actually will work. So you see, this would be standing about where the School of Music is, looking to the east, and on the left there is the multi-use portion of the building with the first floor in retail, the second floor for office space, and the first floor is about 10,000 square feet. Obviously, the second floor is too. However, there will be some areas of the floors, the footage and the square feet taken out by other uses such as conference rooms or common space or restrooms and that sort of thing. And then the 5 stories above will be the residential. So moving to the right where you see the Element logo, that's the entry to that's the vestibule entryway, which will serve as a common entryway for both the residential component of the building on the left and the hotel on the right, where you'll obviously go left to the lobby for the residential or right to the lobby for the hotel, where your typical hotel lobby functions will happen. This is a little closer view and looking south towards the river, more towards the riverfront crossings area. I think the thing to point out here is the activated street level, something that hasn't occurred on this lot in decades. Here you can see a rendering with the School of Music on the right and a sort of southeasterly view at the corner of the development here along Clinton and Burlington. Then this is, I'll run through these floor plans fairly quickly, but this is the 61-space garage, which is accessible from the Court Street Transportation Center in this spot. This would be the first level where along Gilbert Street at the top of the slide here would be the retail frontages. You can see the blue across the middle here is the entryway vestibule, and then the pink area here are all the hotel functions. This is the second level with office space in the multi-use building. The second level, which serves as an upper story terrace with an outdoor pool on top of the vestibule, if you can imagine that. And then at the east end of the vestibule in the second story will be the hotel's fitness area here and the access and elevator up and down to the Court Street Transportation Center. So again, both of those accesses to and from the Court Street Transportation Center would need or will need agreements that go with them. And then you can see in the hotel area here the typical layout for the hotel room mix. And these are typical of the apartment levels and everything from levels 3 through 7. And this cross-section, at least the piece on the left, will show you in a view, in a cross-section, as if you were standing at the School of Music on Clinton Street and looking at the building, how it actually stacks up, how the center section of the vestibule works, the outdoor pool, et cetera. Then on the right, imagine that you're standing at about the new Hilton Garden Inn and looking north. This would show a cross-section of what would be the Court Street Transportation Center and that underground access to the tenant parking in the basement parking below. These are some images from the Element Hotel brand, which would be typical of those that the developer would use in the Element here in the Iowa City project. And now for the numbers. You don't have to look at the whole table, but I wanted to briefly explain how we look at projects like this. And we started off analyzing this as two different projects. We weren't sure how the ownership was going to be, and we thought, well, it'd be better to have it analyzed separately in case the project really would split into two. But, well, it's staying as one project, but we have the cost divided into two. And the important thing here is to note the sources and the uses. And the uses of funds are all those that go into a project, including land acquisition, construction, furnishing, architectural and engineering services, marketing to get it running, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's where, on the far right, the $40.7 million project comes in, or total project cost comes in. Then we have to look at how funding for that would come together, and we have certain rules that you help set that require the developer maximize the amount of debt they can attract to the project so that when they come to the city, the maximum amount of dollars that they can get from a commercial lending institution and from their investors is already set to go in the project, and the city's funding would really be the last dollars in. And we also have a rule, as you know, that states that the developer's skin in the game or their equity must be equal to or greater than the request they get for tax increment financing. So here's how that stacks up in this $40.7 million project. The developers would get a total of about $451,000 in loans. They would put in $10.3 million themselves, and we would fill the remaining $8 million in gap. And I want to focus on how we arrive at the $8 million in gap a little bit on the next slide. When we do the financial analysis, we not only look at the total development costs and the sources and uses that come together, that could come together for the project, but we also look at the operating costs of a project over a 20-year time frame so that we have the 60,000-foot view of the kinds of return that the developer would get in and after operating the project over a period of time. And if that return is reasonable, then and it doesn't provide undue enrichment to the developer, then we would bring something like that forward to you to request city financial assistance. And in this case, the project itself, the two different projects combined, demonstrated a $5.2 million financial gap. Now, the way it works in the development world is while you have an illustrated gap of $5.2 million, that means you need $5.2 million to get that project up and out of the ground. That's part of making that project go and be a success. In order to do that, developers will say, well, I could get a TIF loan. I could get a loan based on TIF rebates, but then I need to finance that loan based on the TIF rebates over a period of time. And in this case, the gap could be filled with TIF, $5.2 million, which the developer would go out and get a commercial loan, promising to use the TIF rebates to repay that. But that period of time of repayment requires additional financing, and that's the interest on the TIF loan that you see here in the second line of this table. And in this case, timing is important, and that's partly why the financing costs are added in. But also, TIF rebates don't start until a project is up and out of the ground, until the city assessor has assessed the property, until the property owners have paid the tax, and only then does the TIF rebate kick in. And in this case, that won't happen until June of 2022, some years away. Well, you can imagine that time lag between now, when you want to get the project started, and then when you can start paying off the TIF loan simply adds to the cost of the project. So in this case, and because of that time lag, we've negotiated with the developers a total of $600,000 TIF advance. And that it's a little bit different than on upfront cash in that the risk to the city is far lower, because in this case we've negotiated that could be that would only be granted after the project is completed and after a year after the developers have had their certificate of completion. So essentially no risk to the city in providing the $600,000 at that time, which would be earlier than the first TIF rebates start. And in any case, the total of TIF rebates and the TIF advance would not be greater than $8 million. Several aspects of the project help meet the strategic planning priorities that the council has set out a couple of years ago almost now. The first being to have a solid financial foundation. Well, this would help in that endeavor because it would bring a $22 million boon to the tax base in Iowa City. Additionally, the hotel will generate on average of $250,000 or more, which obviously over time adds up to a substantial amount. And the hotel tax in Iowa City, about half of it goes to the police in support of our public safety, and the other half is divided between Parks and Rec and tourism promotion. It also goes toward the desire to have a strong and resilient economy by connecting downtown with riverfront crossings on probably the best corner in downtown there is. It adds office, retail, and residential, which will add the vitality to that corner as well. And finally, or not finally, but it helps to foster a healthier downtown neighborhood. This is a block that, as you know, has been vacant or a parking lot for decades and decades. It encourages a vibrant and walkable core by having the storefront windows on the first floor, and also by incorporating the setbacks required in the riverfront crossings design plan, allowing for better walkability along Burlington Street State Highway. And finally, it helps to promote environmental sustainability by the use of the roof-mounted solar panels on the mixed-use building and the achieving of the Green Seal Gold certification for the Element Hotel. So that was all I was going to say about the project, which went on a little longer than I had hoped, but we also have the developers here, and you could direct questions to either me or the developers, and of course other staff are here as well.
Kevin or Ben, do either of you want to start with anything before we get into discussion? Or
Well, really on the hotel side of things, the element we really view the extended stay opportunity is significant. There's no extended stay hotels in Iowa City, and that was really where this thought originated on this project with Element. 92 rooms is really not a big hotel, so we think it's a really nice fit. Also, with the Sheraton, becoming a boutique branded hotel, this Element brand being part of Marriott, it's a nice fit, nice transition to have some Marriott hotel rooms in downtown still. So we really think it's a nice synergy and a great fit for the corner.
I think a lot of people did not realize that Sheraton was under the Marriott flag.
It recently had become.
I know,
yeah.
That big change.
Yep.
And extended stay refers to what, 5 to 30 days or something like that?
Yeah, really 5 nights plus is extended stay demand.
One of the questions I had when Wendy was going through that, does the hotel have laundry facilities?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Significant guest laundry, bigger than a normal hotel that you'd see. It'll be really geared towards people that stay longer so they can feel comfortable doing their laundry.
Okay, that was one of the things. One of the things I really like that was in there was that gold green seal. I mean, every time I go stay in hotels, I look at all these little plastic bottles, and like wondering, do they ever take these and refill them, or they just throw all this stuff away? What gets recycled? So the idea of the dispensers and stuff, I really like that idea. I mean, some people may look at it as a really small one, but when you add up all the turnover in hotels, and if they do throw away or have to recycle all those little plastic bottles, that over time in all those hotel rooms becomes a really big issue. So. I mean, overall, I'm real supportive of this project. I think it's great to see that corner finally being developed. I like the combination of uses that we're seeing here. I think getting more hotel rooms downtown is a big plus. Wendy, I was going to ask, on the hotel motel tax, is that the total, and Iowa City only gets a portion of that, correct? The $250,000?
Iowa City gets all of it, and then by ordinance divides it up roughly 50% to police, 25% to Parks and Rec, and 25% to
CVB.
tourism promotion, right?
Okay, because I knew part of it went to CVB, and that's what I was trying to remember was what percentage kind of went away from the city. So, okay. But still, we're basically getting 3/4 of that for police and Parks and Rec, which is a huge annual boost to those budgets as well as the property taxes that'll come online on the $22 million value. So I like the fact that there's office space. I like the first floor retail. I think, again, the idea that with the reconstruction of the Clinton-Burlington Street intersection, it's going to make it easier for people to feel comfortable getting across Burlington Street, and this is going to give people a great motivation that is very close and very visible to cross that street, and again, kind of make that connection to further down into riverfront crossings. I think the numbers certainly make sense with what we have done as a city in the past in terms of the developer's equity and how much we're willing to put in. As everybody knows, we use the National Development Council to review and analyze all these numbers. They bring an expertise to the table that we don't have in-house and doesn't make sense for us to pay for in-house. So I think that's all really positive. This being a prime corner in downtown, if there's one small negative, I would say, I wish I had a few more stories to it. I just think that's one of those prime locations that it would have been nice to go a little higher, but.
And I can comment on that. Part of the reason, I mean, this was, originally we had a concept like that, and we, through the changes in the TIP policies and some of those things, and kind of a maximum amount of the ceiling on what we were told you could ever get, it's just a lot more affordable not to do high-rise construction in this situation, so we split the two pieces apart versus doing taller, and that was the biggest drive behind it, because the cost to go high-rise would have been significantly more for the same amount of, product that we're putting out there, so.
Other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to ask some questions. I think it's our duty and responsibility to pose questions that may appear critical, but I think we just need to have them out there because of the way something like TIF plays out at the council level. I can't read my own typing, excuse me. So these questions don't necessarily indicate how I feel about the project. I just want to ask questions that I'm pretty confident are out there. The first one's really simple. I see two different renderings of the two buildings from the west. One appears in Karen's, Gerritsen, is that right? In her report, and the other is the one we just saw here. And just to judge from looking at those images, they show the extended stay hotel as having a somewhat different design from what appears in our report.
Yeah, I think your packet maybe was what this got picked up with the older one, where I think what Wendy showed on the screen was the latest version. And that was, we discussed the step back on that, and we all kind of agreed that that would be better not to do that, given how we wanted to have the symmetry between them, so.
Okay, I mean, I figured there was an adjustment over time, but I just noticed that Karen's differed from yours, and I wanted to make sure I knew why. Okay, second question. This is going to sound really rude, but I know there are people out in the world who will be asking this kind of question. Just for clarification, does any of this TIF go directly to the developers for personal gain? And so, translated into different language, what's your expected rate of return? You didn't state it there. I know it's in the report.
Yeah.
And I guess rate of return can easily be translated into the word profit. So you're going to be building this project, you're taking a risk. What's the expected rate of return? And just help me understand how that's not just money that is going into your pocket.
Part of the report that Wendy and Karen, or what Karen put together, if you go back there's a paragraph on each project in there that spells out that, based on our projections and everything like that, the internal rate of return, they said, is probably less than what most people would get on a project like this. And as far as developers go and people that invest in this, of course, they need to get, they expect to get a return. What I can say, the numbers that we have are well below what we normally get on projects. But we've had some discussion with Jeff on some of these other pieces of part of it. So, obviously, hopefully, as we go through this, our costs are in line. We have our operating expenses. We estimated those pretty low, and I think we've estimated our rents pretty high. So, I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room for us in this deal, the way we did it, but we just wanted to make sure we could get it done. So,
Yeah, from our perspective in looking at this, I would say the margins are extremely thin on this project, even compared to other projects that we've had involvement with in the downtown area. What we had calculated, or the National Development Council calculated the internal rate of return on the mixed-use building at 6.42%, which is I think even in Karen's words in the memo, below what would be expected in most markets, but is within that norm because of the strength of our market. And then the hotel has a little bit of a higher rate of return at just about 7.5%. But you have to understand that hotels are a much riskier venture, and we would normally expect to see a hotel rate of return well into the double digits, and Ben could probably tell you what they look at in most markets. I would think it wouldn't be reasonable in a lot of markets to expect a rate of return that's double what we're showing on this. So it's a very thin margin on this particular project.
Good deal. That's very helpful. Thank you. So I'm sure there are some people in the city who would think, because there's an $8 million TIF, that's money going to the developer. So the answer is no. It's not going to the developer. It's going to the construction of the building and enabling the construction of the building. What is going to the developer is this rate of return. Between 6.5% and 8% and 7% or something like that, right?
And the thing you have to remember on the TIF, right, the way this isn't upfront money where the city has to go out and bond it, and so of course, that's what we wanted, but Jeff said no to us. But the thing is, we have to go borrow that money. I mean, so when you look at the sources and uses, it says city $8 million. Well, no, we're going to go borrow $6 million or whatever to buy, and then the payments that we make will be done by the TIF rebates. Now, the other thing you have to keep in mind is, like right now, the property tax is at a base there, right? So even though we will pay property taxes, about 25% of that is a protected debt levy. So even though, the property taxes may go to $500,000-$600,000 a year on both sides, 25% of that will still be kept by the city. So we don't get a 100% rebate of all the taxes paid. They will go up. So there will be some immediate benefit from a tax revenue standpoint to the city.
Just to clarify, city, county, and schools will
Yeah, city, county.
all
yeah.
have a part of that protected debt levy.
Yeah, and we've had lengthy presentations from Wendy about the protected debt levy, and in all of the meetings we've held about TIF, amending the TIF policy, and all the sessions we've held with stakeholder groups, you've conveyed that point, have you not?
I have.
Yeah, good. I thought it was important to be clear about that. Then another thing has to do with the but-for question, which our policy indicates is really important, correct? We need to ask the but-for question. So, meaning, why is city financial assistance required in this particular instance? Why can't the project proceed without such assistance? But for.
Well, I mean, just if you look at the overall project cost being $40 million, that's well above what even a reasonable assessment would be. Like Wendy says, the assessed value would be closer to 22. So just because of the design and some of the extra things we're trying to do in the project, that will drive up the cost. And then, obviously just looking at the rate of returns being as minimal as they are for us, that if you didn't have it, it would not be a positive cash flow situation. So, you wouldn't do it because it wouldn't be developed under this situation.
And
There's a gap in financing,
Right.
and we need to fill the gap, or we can't do the project.
And the site, I mean, I moved here in 1986. My vague recollection is that there was an empty sort of parking lot and I think a shoe store. There was some small one-story structure there. Otherwise, it's sat there forever. And I can remember being involved in debates over Mrs. Hieronymus's proposed project back in the 90s. So yeah, it's been there for a long time. So that fact indicates to me that some kind of city support is required to make a development occur, to make it possible on that site. But I thought the question needed to be asked, and so we can have a clear answer to it.
I mean, to me, Jim, it also just comes back really, a real clear, concise way is just a discussion we just had on the internal rate of return. I mean, with the gap being filled, they're only getting an internal rate of return of being between 6.4 and 7.5 on the two projects. So if you don't fill the gap, that internal rate of return just goes down to the point of maybe even being negative. So that's kind of to me, the quick and simple answer is they can't turn a profit.
Yeah, okay. I know, Rockney, I'm chewing up your time here a little bit too, but I have maybe a couple or three other questions. Yeah, I understand that according to our policy, every other financial piece of the project must be in place prior to consideration of the TIF.
Correct.
But I understand from Karen Gerritson's report that the development team has been in discussion with lenders, but they have not presented letters of interest, preliminary commitments, or term sheets from them at this time. I think that's a quote from Karen's report. So are all the other financial pieces of the project in place?
They are, right. And then when there are outstanding pieces of information that we'd like to have, the financial analysis is done based on the assumption that these would be the parameters that the lending institution would have, based on norms such as loan-to-value ratio and debt coverage ratios.
Okay, so they are in place?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to argue against Jeff briefly so he can tell me why he's correct and I'm not. So I understand that a little over $2 million of the gap reflects the developer's cost of financing the loan. So could we reduce the size and duration of the TIF by providing an upfront loan?
Could you reduce it? We have to pay that interest one way or another. If we're going to bond for it, the city's going to be taking on that interest cost as well. So I'm not sure that if your goal is to reduce the length of the TIF, that would be the preferred solution. Really what the difference between the upfront TIF and the rebate TIF is it's a transfer of risk. We're shifting the risk from the city to the developer.
I thought you would say that. Thanks. So I'd rather hear what you have to say, Rockne, before, explicitly stating what I think about the proposal.
Yeah, there's a lot I really like about this project. One thing I'm curious about are the economics of condos versus apartments. So my first question is did you evaluate condos at that northwest corner unit? And if you did, why did you decide not to? It's my understanding these will be apartments year-to-year type scenario, or are there some condo units in there? Because I'm a big fan of, in addition to the short-term piece of it, getting people with really sink roots in the downtown as well. So what's your comment in terms of the economics of that?
Well, I think the building will be condoed. Like,
Okay,
I think
eventually?
the plan would be, well, it would be initially, but I think the plan would be, obviously to maintain them as a, own them as a developer, and owners, like you said, you've had the property a long time, you build it, you sell it, and it's gone, you don't have it anymore. But I think we will condo it. The decision hasn't been finalized if we will sell a part of them yet or not. That'll be something we'll just kind of have to wait to see where we get the final numbers and how they work out. But these are pretty spacious units. I mean, there's nothing in this building, I believe, under 700 square feet.
Yeah,
so they're all pretty good size.
And in terms of the economics of it, is there a substantial difference in terms of, as you get the numbers out, evaluating the condo versus essentially the year-to-year apartment scenario? Or is it essentially just a wash in terms of what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I think from our standpoint, we own properties a long time. So I think, as an investor group, people get into these things because they want to have a long-term, they put money in, they want to get a return as it goes, even though if it's not as high as they'd like to see, versus sell it and then be gone, have it gone tomorrow.
Okay.
I have to make one clarification. They will be condominiums.
Correct.
All apartments built these days are condominiums.
Pretty
The
much,
question
yeah.
is whether it's going to be owner-occupied.
Owner-occupied is
We
the
don't like to
question,
refer
yeah.
to them as apartments. They're
Okay.
condos for rent.
Condos for
lease.
rent, okay. That was exactly what I was talking about. And also, I'm really pleased with the solar. What I want to know in terms of the economics of that, what was the cost scenario in terms of being able to do that, the solar on the rooftop? Or are you able, because one of the arguments with solar, if you get the tax rebates, that you may not even need any additional assistance because of that.
Well, when we negotiated and got these numbers, we did not have that cost in our budget. It was something Jeff said, hey, you need to do something for sustainability. We need to do something, so we checked into the solar. I think the system that we're looking at is maybe $200,000 in addition to what our costs are, so that number is not figured into our costs.
Terrific, that's great. I have no further questions.
Let me ask one more question that I forgot to ask. It has to do with the affordable housing component. What's the number of units that would be affordable?
It'd be 7 units.
7 units. Do they have to be provided on-site in the building, or can there be a buyout and, or provided off-site, or?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that we'd like at least for you to have a discussion on, for the developer to be able to talk to you about, because that's one component that the developer would still like to engage on is how that affordable housing is provided. And of course, at this stage, we're not at the development agreement. We're not presenting you. There's not a development agreement in the packet. Matter of fact, I think the developer just received the first draft of it earlier this week. So the financial analysis was done with the provision of all the 7 units on site. That's how we based our gap analysis. The Riverfront Crossings Code does allow you to pay a fee in lieu of, and so there's that 10% that you can pay a fee in lieu of. And similarly, the TIF policy that is currently in place allows for the negotiation of a fee in lieu of as well. You're aware that with the development agreement for Augusta Place here at the City Hall parking lot, that those units were provided off-site. And generally what we've communicated to the developer is that if we're going to consider off-site affordable housing, we need to know the specifics at the time of the development agreement, like we did with the Augusta place. We need to know where those units are. We need to know the condition of those units, the rent levels of those units, all those details so that we can be sure that it's still meeting our affordable housing goals. We don't want to get into a situation where we agree to do off-site without the details and then come to find out the only off-site units are not acceptable to the city. So I don't think we're at a place where we can consider off-site units right now. The fee in lieu of is certainly something that we can. I think that the developer is interested in either doing a fee in lieu of for all those units or for a blended solution where there may be some on-site and some off-site. This is one of the first TIF agreements to come before you in which there is an actual TIF policy in place. Remember, this was just added to the TIF policy last year. Previously, we've negotiated that on our own without the backing of a specific policy. Knowing the goals of the Riverfront Crossing District, which is to disperse the affordable housing throughout, we maintained through the negotiations that they need to be provided on site. I felt that that was in line with the council expectations. I do acknowledge, though, that we do have buyout provisions again in the affordable housing and the TIF policy, and again, that's something that Kevin can talk about his interest there, and it'd be nice to have a discussion here and perhaps when it goes to the council as well as under what circumstances do you want us to negotiate that piece out? And if we do, we may need to look at the gap analysis again and see how that changes the numbers of the entire project.
Susan, what do you think? Oh.
Education. Augusta Place has 6 on-site units as well as off-site.
I'm wondering what, Susan, what you think about that, and Rockne, of course.
I guess my thought is, depends on where those off-site units would be. If we're looking off-site, it would depend on where. I think we've all committed to the fact that we want affordable units spread around the community. I think there's that challenge and that balance that they have to try and look at that is a challenge in terms of putting affordable housing on some of the most expensive real estate in the city. And so, does that make financial sense? I'm not saying that we exclude people from downtown that need affordable housing, but where is that balance of how much of it do we insist on downtown and how much of it do we allow in some different locations? I might even be more interested in the fee in lieu of, because then that gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of how we address those units through the Housing Trust Fund, through, whatever other mechanisms we can use, people who are really good at doing it have done it for a long time, so.
Yeah, and the way that we've at least contemplated using any fee in lieu of the inclusionary zoning, the 10% that's required from inclusionary zoning, those dollars generated from those units would need to stay in the Riverfront Crossings District. So I think we're going to, you may not have as high of real estate cost as you do on this corner, but certainly real estate costs throughout the Riverfront Crossings District are high. So you're going to run into a similar type of situation there. I think we have more flexibility with the 5% that are the over and above just required through the TIF. We could go outside the Riverfront Crossings District. We'd combine that into our Affordable Housing Fund, and we have a formula on how those funds are divvied up. So the benefits to the city on a fee in lieu of is, we do have that cash in hand. We've got flexibility. We might be able to incent other development with those funds by contributing to the project. We may be able to negotiate longer periods of affordable housing. So instead of just the life of the TIF or 20 years as we require through our TIF policy, perhaps it's something that we can get affordability in perpetuity, or 25 years or 30 years or something like that. We have that flexibility. It's just an unknown on how, what opportunities may arise with those funds.
Yeah, because, when we went through this process, there was a lot of discussion about what options existed, and we went through it, and part of, and if I'm correct, most of the analysis is done not taking the affordable housing piece into it, and that even pulls our returns even more. And a little bit, Susan mentioned about putting this in the affordable, these higher units. So like for our person, like the burden, I don't want to call it burden, but our subsidy from what our asking rents are is over $1,000 a unit. So when you do that over 7 units, you can imagine, there's a lot more, the $80,000 fee in lieu of could be highly leveraged to put into, you could create 2 units, versus 1, and then the burden gets all of, we take such a subsidy, we subsidize that affordable housing unit so much in this building compared to what somebody else may have. And we do care about, we're working with the Housing Fellowship on a joint project down on Dubuque Street. So it's not that we don't support affordable housing. My whole goal was when we did this is, and I've even mentioned this to Jeff, there's a 10% in the riverfront crossing where you have these 3 options. When you get to TIF policy, then all of a sudden it goes to 15%. So, my suggestion was that we would commit to putting a minimum, 2 in there and then find options, either maybe it's a blend of all 3 options. We find a couple other units somewhere else, we pay a fee somewhere else, and we have the 2 units on site. That was kind of the directions we were hoping to go. But obviously, the decision rests with what you guys are like.
It's funny that you just had raised that, because really my position at this point is I really like what our staff has done over these last 2 years on affordable housing policy. I feel like we've consistently seen them sort of anticipate the way the council wants to go in this direction. So I guess my thought today would be, let's trust the judgment of staff to engage in dialogue with you. I like that 3 options as a starting point, and then come back. And I'm confident that when it comes back before us, we will have something that will really meet what our goals are. So that would be my thought at this point. I think that 3 options would be a sort of a great starting point as a framework. It would be nice to get some units on.
Oh, yeah, and that's what I say.
And that's the point, is you're acknowledging that sort of that's what our goal is, that everyone has an opportunity to participate in our housing market, but we do it in a way also that makes financial sense. So that would be my point at this point.
And the 5% has been, the
Yeah.
extra 5% for TIF has been included in the gap analysis. The
Yeah.
10% that's required.
Oh, the 5%, yeah, the 10% has. Yeah.
The 5%, yes.
That's correct, thank you.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Yep.
So I want to just make sure I'm understanding this. You are okay with us engaging in some sort of blended solution here?
Yep.
I still maintain that, I guess I feel pretty strongly that off-site units have to be identified at the time of the development agreement. If there is a amendment to the development agreement down the road that the council wants to consider, because there's sites identified after we've inked that deal, then I think it's appropriate to go through that amendment process. So we'll look at a blended solution with the developers, and do you want to see that come back to you, or are you okay just going to the full council with that at the time the development agreement's ready?
I'm okay going to full council.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
So part of what's going on here is that we're learning through experience, learning by doing. So I think that's okay, and we have to pay attention to what we're learning. So let me express my view about this. I support the project. Overall, I think it's a terrific project. I think it'll be a tremendous asset to the downtown area, especially since that site has sat empty for at least 30 years. Maybe more, I don't know. It also contains these affordable housing elements, which we value, the sustainability features, which we value. So I'm very pleased about the whole thing. Plus, we have this ambition to improve the walkability and urban amenities of the downtown and the city as a whole. I think this is such a special intersection that it's important to get it right, and I think this proposal does. It will really enhance that quality of urbane walkability, if you will, and especially it'll really resonate with the new music building and with the Hilton Garden Inn just to the south of these proposed structures. So I am pleased to support it.
I would echo Jim's comments. Our downtown is really this beautiful mosaic, and there's all different types of pieces that fit that mosaic. One piece that I think has really been missing is this extended stay, which is really surprising in terms of the economics of it, because you think about the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. It's really been a key need that we've really needed downtown for a long time, and you're providing that. And I think then hooking that extended stay option with Voxman School of Music, I mean, you can almost just see the vibrancy happening as those two pieces intersect. In terms of this owner-occupied versus rental, hopefully over time the economics will make sense to do more owner-occupied, but we'll trust your judgment on this. I just couldn't be more pleased with how this is really going out. I think this really demonstrates what you can do when you really engage with the staff. I'm really pleased that the staff recommended the solar, and I'm really hoping that you can report back to us, hopefully as you monitor the energy bills on this, you really show that the economics of this will make sense. And I'm also pleased it didn't even need any subsidy. I think as we start thinking about these sorts of economics of green energy and green projects, we always assume it's more expensive and it doesn't pay off without a subsidy. Well, I think you guys are demonstrating that that's not true. So I couldn't be more pleased to support this project.
Okay, I think I made my comments at the beginning. Do we have a motion to recommend this to the City Council?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Cole, seconded by Throgmorton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are approved, 3-0. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Congratulations. Look forward to seeing this go.
Expect that this will come to the council. It's not going to show up on your next agenda. We still have a fair amount of negotiations to get through or just legal back and forth on the development agreement. So it may be a few meetings before we get to council on that.
Okay.
And I do want, Wendy had on her thing about completion like 2020. We hope to have it done by 2019.
Sounds good.
Before they leave, if you wouldn't mind, one of the updates we were going to provide after the entire meeting, but I wanted Kevin in particular to hear this. There was an article by Andy Davis in the Press Citizen, I don't know if that was today or yesterday, Andy, but about the Oral B expansion, which is just fantastic news for our community, and that couldn't have happened without Kevin and the team at Hodge allowing for that lease arrangement. They certainly had a number of different options that they could have explored, but I think they recognized the community value in the Oral B proposal, and we certainly appreciate your decision to work with them as opposed to some of the other options you might have had.
Glad it's finally out now.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
That's
Kevin.
great for the community. Thank you, guys.
See you.
Okay. As we move on to item number 4, consider recommendation to the City Council for revised TIF policies. I just want to take a look at the time here. We're already at almost 9:25. I do have a 10:30 commitment, so we are going to have to wrap up everything by 10:15. So that gives us about 55 minutes to get through here. What I would suggest is, as I've looked through the draft TIF policy that Wendy provided in this packet, it would seem to me that there might be a few of these that we could just check off without a whole lot of discussion. And actually, I think what I'm going to do is maybe work from the back forward, because to me, those are the ones I think the three of us are pretty much in agreement on. So let's start there. Underwriting and application. Were there any questions or concerns from the committee in regards of the language there?
Nope.
Okay. So underwriting and application were good. Other public interests. This dealt with like using the whole TIF district for money for arts and cultural, historic preservation, public improvement. Not, in other words, not project specific.
Nope.
Give me a second,
Sure.
please. I think my answer is no. I don't remember, I was writing notes all last night, so.
Okay. We'll assume we're good to go on that one at the moment then. Quality jobs. This one really ties it to the state numbers, basically, and those get updated periodically. I think right now they were at $21+ an hour or 24. I forget. It's over 20, I know that. But those do get updated.
And just a question, what is our existing standard and what standard does this adopt? Does this enhance the standard or does it ratify the existing standard?
I think it ratifies the existing, correct?
Yeah.
Basically,
That's
what
correct,
we're
it does.
doing, if we're giving a TIF based on creating high-quality jobs, then that's the standard that has to be met over a certain period of time. So that's using that state. Jeff?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, because there's been some confusion in the community. So when we have a project like we just discussed with Hieronymus, those wage standards do not apply to, for example, the retail jobs or the office jobs, and that we're really, or construction, we're really looking at manufacturing type of jobs in most cases. It could be office when we incent an office user specifically for a use of a facility, but this provision only comes in a very small subset of projects that we consider.
So good on quality jobs then?
Yeah.
Okay. Social justice. I just had a couple of real quick questions here on item B. Is it typically going to be not be an issue for the general contractor to have all that information by the time the building permit is issued? Is that?
Well, I reviewed this with Bob Downer, who represents McComas Messina, and he thought this language was acceptable.
He was comfortable. Okay, that on all parts of it?
Yeah.
B and C. Okay, that was, I didn't have any problem with it. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to codify something then that was going to put developers and/or general contractors in a real bind. That's,
We understand it, there could even at the time of building permit be subcontractors that aren't known, or throughout a life of a project, subcontractors can change. So, the expectation would be that we could get an update from the general contractor at any point during the construction of the project.
okay. That was my only concern. Anybody else have any concerns on the social justice piece?
I love it. It's good.
Okay, looks good. All right. Affordable housing.
Look good to me.
Good?
We'd
Okay.
already
Yep.
decided
Okay,
on
just
it.
wanted to confirm everything. Historic preservation. For me, under the clarification needed, I would not see contributing properties be included in the architecturally significant. I think Wendy, even in your memo, have indicated a major conflict, even within the comp plan, of, I think it recommended that project on Washington Street between the Jefferson Hotel and the Midwest One Bank, and you've got the map up there now, thank you, that shows all those contributing properties in between. So right there, you've got a conflict within the comp plan of kind of a major project they're suggesting, but then the idea of saying contributing properties have that same status as architecturally significant. So in that first clarification, I would say that the architecturally significant properties do not include ones that are simply listed as contributing.
Yeah, I would agree that architecturally significant should not include properties noted as contributing, because they're not architecturally significant.
Okay.
But I think that buildings which replace contributing structures should preserve and enhance the historic character of the block. So this is an urban design kind of statement. And it means, for example, given that example that you just referred to, Susan, currently the buildings in the stretch between Midwest One and the Jefferson Building are 2 stories. I think that's correct, anyhow, 2 stories in height. So if, say, a 7-story building was proposed at the street front, I think that would pretty dramatically alter the historic character of the block. So I think we need to have language similar to what I just said about preserving the historic character of the block that would be affected.
That language, I believe you'll find on page 56 or so, 54, 5, and 6 of the master plan that sets that goal in mind, to keep that historic, to keep things in historic context. Things don't necessarily have to look historic, but they have to fit within that context. And I think we've got built-in tools to do that, such as setbacks and that sort of thing, before a building would rise to a higher height.
And we, based on your direction at the last meeting, the committee's direction, under the downtown building heights and character section, which we haven't got to yet, there's that actual quote from the comp plan that to preserve and enhance the historic buildings and the character of downtown while encouraging appropriate infill development with a mixed-use building. So I think that sentiment is carried through in that building character line as well.
Okay, I think we just need to be clear about that in any event. And also, my comment points in the direction of a form-based code or its equivalent. And a form-based code is called for, recommended that is, in the Downtown and Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. I believe we should initiate the process of developing a form-based code. But until such time as such a code exists, I think we need to have some other way of ensuring that TIF-supported projects don't radically transform blocks by basically enabling the demolition of a significant number of, quote, contributing structures and replacing them with structures that would pretty radically alter the historic character of the block.
I guess I would go back to the comprehensive plan. We've had a lot of conversation, probably almost more than any other community, about comprehensive plan. And frankly, I'm not in love with that initial recommendation of the comprehensive plan relating to that block, but that was what was required. So I think it's very important that we honor the comprehensive plan in its totality, that we faithfully try to administer to it. So if there are parts of our policy in terms of historic preservation that are inconsistent with what that plan at least suggests, I think we have to make sure that this policy is consistent with our comprehensive plan. So to the extent that we need to address this question of clarifying what a contributing structure is, I would support doing that as staff directs. Because I know that the debate here in the historic preservation community is what do you do on a historic block? Do you replace the adjacent structures with something that sort of looks similar so that it doesn't really fit, or do you go radically different? And that's sort of a debate that I think exists in that community. So at least as far as I'm concerned, let's honor the comprehensive plan and make sure that this is consistent with that. And to the extent that staff's suggestion requires that, I would honor staff's suggestion on that in relation to contributing structures.
In looking at this map, I'm trying to remember when I was going through it. Help me. Okay, I know where my question was. All of those rectangles that do not have a C in them are historic landmark or individually eligible structures?
That's correct.
The white.
The white with nothing in it.
Just blank, yeah.
Okay. Okay. There was at least one or two I questioned, but I don't remember right now.
And I know we keep reminding, maybe you all understand this, but just so the audience understands this too, and anybody watching, our urban renewal area already protects those structures.
Right.
Our renewal plan, I should say, already protects those structures. So that was an amendment back in 2001 that stated we would not use TIF for those properties that you see in white, that with the exception of the Cs, but the blank white parcels.
So the remaining properties with color on them, those colors are the ones that come from the comp plan that we've been talking about. And this slide, fairly contrasts what properties would be affected by those building heights suggested in the comprehensive plan.
But let me, and this doesn't relate to TIF, but let me just clarify this. Those that are individually eligible but have not gotten status, an owner can do anything they want with them within the zoning regulations and if they're not asking for city money, correct?
Correct.
Okay, okay, that's why I just wanted to clarify that. So what we don't know with this map is which ones actually already are protected versus which ones actually have the historic landmark status versus ones that are eligible.
True.
Okay, that was, I think, part of my,
We lump those together.
for purposes of the TIF discussion, that's fine, but that was part of my confusion, I think, last night as I was trying to make more sense of this. Okay. Let's see, other clarification, I'm just looking at that box where we're talking about the contributing properties. Is there anything else, Wendy, that you needed out of there? You've talked about using the 2001 map to determine historic significance since then.
No, I think the clarification that we are not going to use contributing, are not going to lump the contributing properties as
Architecturally significant.
architecturally significant is what we were after on that one.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah,
that are-
with regard to the historic preservation part, the letter, the May 25th letter from the downtown district encourages us to modify regulations to further incentivize accessibility in historic buildings with narrow footprints specifically, and then there are a couple bulleted items there. That goes into a level of detail I'm not capable of fully going into, but on first glance, it looked to me like a pretty good recommendation. So I'd like, to get clear feedback from the staff about whether there are any complications. Otherwise, I think, it's a good thing to do.
Well, that's one of those issues that we've talked about too, oftentimes, that we might have to use the district-wide TIF because some of those renovations and upgrades in those historic buildings may not create enough of an increment for a project-specific TIF to work. So I think what that points to, Jim, and I'm glad you brought it up because I agree with what they're getting after. We have a lot of, and we've talked about this, a lot of second floors downtown in buildings. They're not going anywhere that we'd really like to see being better utilized. And so I guess I would encourage staff to give some thought to and maybe bring back to us or council maybe a more formalized plan of how we might look at getting a program out there for those buildings downtown that are historic and using district-wide TIF to incentivize some improvements in those.
Yeah, I agree, Susan. I think it's a good idea.
I mean, we need office space, we need more housing, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think we can certainly pull something together. There's significant financial resources that are needed to do so, but
Right.
but it's well within the realm of feasibility. We've had the building change program before. We kind of pressed pause on that after doing it for a couple of years. We can revive that with a narrower focus on those historic properties and for accessibility purposes. But you're talking a whole nother league of expenses instead of those $20,000 or $30,000 $30,000 grants. You're into the hundreds of thousands
Right.
for a lot of these, but you're obviously getting a much greater return too.
Well, and I think it really adds to that vibrancy of downtown by bringing more people down there, whether it's able to live in these spaces that aren't livable now or additional office spaces that could be done. I know we've talked, Jeff, in many cases that means elevators, which is one place that really increases the cost, which also comes back to a point that was in the downtown district memo on the size of elevators. And I'd really like to see staff think about that and bring something back to us on that in terms of your thoughts.
Yeah,
whether that's feasible or not.
Yeah, and that's, and Nancy and I had a short conversation a month or so ago about that. The world of elevators is regulated at the state level.
Okay.
So it's really more of an advocacy strategy and working with our delegation to try to see if there's some adjustments to some of the state rules on the size and type of elevator that can be retrofitted into these units. Because as Nancy mentioned in her memo, you get some of these smaller historic buildings and you can't necessarily drop your standard elevator in there without sacrificing a great deal of square footage and really kind of turning on its head the economics of that property. So there are some smaller options out there that could perhaps increase the accessibility, but they may not be acceptable to the state right now, and that's where we need to have that conversation.
This sounds like something the Metro Coalition would support, and may not be a high priority, but they'd support it.
Okay.
supportive.
Anything else then on the historic preservation? Good? Okay, great. I'm going to actually jump back to the first one because I think the building height is going to be our most challenging one. So going to the very first one of sustainability. My question here would be, we've put in the strategic plan our goals, and we've talked a lot about reducing carbon footprint and carbon emissions and everything. Is there really a logical, and Martha brought this up in her letter to us too, is there really a logical reason, if we're going to require silver LEED, that we're only doing it in the City University Project 1 area?
Yeah, good question. I thought about that after reading Martha's letter as well. And it does seem to me that she makes a good suggestion that if there's TIF support provided to any new residential or mixed-use project anywhere in the city, then LEED Silver should apply. And I think she also suggests having the 8 energy efficiency points apply as well for any of those kinds of projects, right? Yeah, it makes sense to me. And I don't know how many other areas actually would be affected, but.
Jeff, from a staff perspective, do you see issues with this, or?
Oh, it's a cost, and there's some complications on the contractor side, but as long as it's being financed through the city, we just have to realize that that's an added cost that we're paying for. It could be more expensive, I suppose, in some of the outer areas, just because the proximity to the downtown does help with some of the lead points. But I don't see it as if that's what you want. I wouldn't caution you against that. Just know you're going to pay a little bit more. There's not a whole lot of areas that we have TIF'd where that would apply. You might see something, if the Moss property ever develops. We have an urban renewal area up there. Certainly Town Crest it might apply in some of those properties, but the manufacturing districts wouldn't apply. So it probably pretty limited impact, but it could catch a couple properties.
I have one other suggestion that echoes something that appears in Martha's letter. I think the idea of providing non-TIF financial incentives for other non-TIF district residential mixed-use projects might be worth considering. I haven't thought it through. I don't know what the staff thinks at all. But in particular, I think that's the kind of thing that our Climate Action Steering Committee and consultant could fruitfully address, and then they know that stuff better than I do, so we could get some good feedback from them.
Anything else on the sustainability?
The only thing I want to add to that is a clarification that Martha actually pointed out, and I appreciate that. The language, when it comes back to, again, won't refer to the energy efficiency point category. We'll get the category name right. It's actually from the LEED new construction category, the optimized energy performance credits. So when you see something that isn't energy efficiency, that's what we're doing. We're making sure we're using the right language, the same language as the U.S. Green Building Council.
I do just want to reiterate, my preference is that silver would not be absolutely required, but it would be highly preferred or encouraged in our language. So.
Yeah, and I guess just for the record, I should say I do support the 8 energy credits and energy efficiency credits. Yeah. So does Rockney.
Okay. All right, leads us to our last one, the building height and character. One of the things that we talked about, and Wendy's got the map up there now, I think that we've kind of discussed and kind of wondered where it came from, was the map that showed up in, I think, page 106 or whatever it was of the comp plan. And Jeff has a memo in here that kind of, describes the background of kind of where that didn't come from, maybe more than where it did come from. That it seems to me that map with those recommended building heights really did not get the kind of public vetting and discussion that one would expect for it having ended up in the comp plan. And so I had a concern before, but I have a really, really strong concern now about any TIF language that is going to tie our use of TIF to building heights as shown on that particular map. Because I really do not think that that has had the kind of public vetting that it should have in order for us to codify something like that. Secondly, it seems to me that part of the effort with this is really to, if you will, downzone properties in terms of the eligible height.
No, it doesn't, just as a legal matter, it does not downzone anything.
Legally, it does not. I get that. What I'm saying is, I think a lot of the perception publicly is that that is the intent, is to effectively restrict the height because of the known financial need for financial assistance, say for a high rise. Anything, I mean, Kevin mentioned today why they didn't go more than 7 stories. It gets them into steel construction, which is a lot more expensive per square foot, and you've certainly got to go up, and we've seen this in one of our previous memos, then you've got to go up at least the 10 or 12 stories to make it financially viable when you start getting into the steel construction. So to me, the minute as a city, we say that we will not offer TIF based on certain heights on certain properties, we are effectively, not legally, but we are effectively limiting the height on those properties. We are effectively downzoning them, not legally, not by ordinance, but that is the practical effect. If that is what the goal of the council is, that they do not want tall buildings on those sites, then I think that is a discussion that we should have in that form at the council level and actually talk about rezoning those particular properties, if that is the actual goal. If that is not the actual goal, then I do not understand why we would tie TIF money to particular heights on particular parcels.
I'd like to hear Jeff provide a very brief summary of the memo he gave to us concerning the development of that, not yet, I want to say a couple other things, concerning the development of that particular map. Secondly, with regard to vetting, the map appeared in the plan, in the draft plan. It's not our responsibility to make sure that everybody reads every particular component of the plan. In fact, when we as a council adopted it in 2013, we had virtually no discussion about the plan as a whole. So I don't think it's appropriate to say it wasn't vetted adequately enough. It was the public's responsibility to read the plan and express its views in whatever ways the public wanted to express its views. So that's the second thing. And I guess the third is, just for the record, we would not be downzoning anything. We would be exercising the city council's, therefore the city's, discretion about how to discretion and judgment about how to use the tax incentives available to the city in order to achieve the objectives contained in the comprehensive plan.
All right, so I won't go into great detail on all of the public input that was included with the Riverfront Crossings plan, because there certainly was a great deal of it. At one point in time during the process, there was some discussion. There were some community charrettes, even particularly focused on downtown, where one of the topics was redevelopment opportunities, and through a public charrette process, a number of properties were identified as candidates for redevelopment. And so it was after that charrette that the consultant team started working on this map that you see here. And what they did is they blended the public feedback that they got at that charrette on redevelopment opportunities with existing conditions and really with zoning constraints and the kind of the feedback they've heard generally about what people want in their downtown. So when you look at the map, and do we have the actual map from the?
I don't have it super handy on this computer.
Okay. Well, you've all seen it in your packet, and I think it's been distributed quite a bit recently. But so there's a combination of some existing conditions, and I think the consultant was really looking at, okay, what are those properties where we don't anticipate redevelopment, either because they're historically designated or for whatever reason they just didn't see it develop. So there's some existing conditions reflected in there, and then on some of the properties there are that were identified for redevelopment. The consultant team put what they thought was an appropriate building height, given the kind of the discussion on maintaining that downtown character that was taking place at that time. So, and the third piece was that they also took into consideration some of the existing code language. As our planning staff talked to us about, they said, some of the properties are very constrained from a parking standpoint, and the code at that time had parking requirements, and if they didn't feel like a property could get up extremely tall, then they may have chosen one of the shorter ranges, and that particularly was one of the discussions with the law firm on the corner of Lynn and College that's highlighted as I believe that's a 2 to 3 color there, maybe it's 4 to 6. That was one in which we talked about with our planning staff. They said, because we said, well, that's a corner property. Why wouldn't that have been a higher? And that was one where they felt the parking constraints on that property probably would limit it anyway within our current zoning code. So there was all kinds of that discussion. In terms of public vetting, this map first appeared at the large presentation that took place here in this room. There were poster boards outside in the lobby area there. This map was one of 4 that were on a poster board that people had the opportunity to look at. The public presentation that took place here included a PowerPoint from the consultant, and this map was not included in that PowerPoint, nor did we see it appear at the planning and zoning or the council deliberations on the plan itself. I believe the plan was available on the website for about 45 days from when it was in draft, finalized in draft form until it went to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so it was certainly out there and accessible. But there wasn't the attention to it. Most of the discussion that we had on building heights in relation to the plan took place in the second step, which was the form-based code adoption for riverfront crossings, and of course that did not include the downtown proper, but that's really when the Planning Commission and the council really started to focus in on building heights, but that's all south of Burlington.
I think a huge part of the comments you just made, Jeff, and that we're in here is that they really looked at the parking issues in also determining what they thought some of these heights should be. I mean, we've got a parking study going on right now, and we potentially could be making significant changes to our parking requirements downtown. And so to develop a TIF policy that is going to limit the heights of buildings for which we would offer TIF based on a map that used what may be very, very outdated parking regulations does not make sense to me at all.
Does the parking study include the downtown?
No, it doesn't. It focuses on the north side neighborhood. The conversations that we had, it was around the time that the North Lynn project downtown was being considered, was if we're going to look at parking changes downtown, the council first wanted to address the surrounding neighborhoods to ensure that any changes that we made downtown did not negatively impact those neighborhoods. So whether that, come August, you're going to get the report from Opticos and that will include the parking study for that neighborhood, and then it'll be a council decision on whether you want to pursue changes to the downtown code requirements.
Right.
I guess my comment is, and in terms of this public input piece, I think certainly one of the core aspects of government is to clearly telegraph where you would like to go, and I think to clearly communicate to developers what your expectations are. When I look at this TIF review process, we've been in this process now for nearly a year. I don't think it's any surprise what my views are in development, what Jim's are, what Susan's are. We had a very comprehensive process inviting all relevant stakeholders, and we invited them to give their input. We even had a specific subcommittee with architectural specialists that weighed in on this particular problem. We've talked about this for nearly a year. I mean, so this notion that there hasn't been input, we have the cameras going. We've had these televised. These have been subject to public notice. I would say this particular process has been one of the most open and clear processes that I can imagine. It's been for nearly a year. When did we actually start the TIF review process? I think it was like September?
A year ago.
At least a year. So this notion that we haven't had public input.
Wait. I need to interrupt you. I hate to be rude and do that, but I didn't say there hadn't been public input. My comments that I was just addressing was the review and the input on that map during the comp plan process. It had nothing to do with the input for this TIF policy.
But I'm talking about reviewing the heights, right, and where we're going with that in terms of adopting that as policy. I mean, so for example, what if tomorrow we were to say, okay, we're going to review the comprehensive plan? We would have to do this whole process over again. I think the point is that we've clearly telegraphed the direction that we want to go. And this notion that there's a surprise or there hasn't been input in terms of where we're going with heights, I just don't see that happening. The second thing really relates to this whole notion of whether, I think there seems to be this argument that we don't understand what the comprehensive plan is, that we think it's a regulatory code, that we think that we're bound and we can never depart from that. We've never said that. We've never claimed that the comprehensive plan is an administrative code. We've always said that it's a guide. It conveys what our values are. It is an imperfect document, but it's the best we have that incorporates a public process. It's nearly 4 years old. You know, some of the development issues that the community has faced have been going on for quite some time. So this is not something that sort of comes out of nowhere. So I'm comfortable with where we're at is honoring that vision. And I think the other thing in terms of the regulatory piece of it or not, I think the reality is that the direction of where the council wants to go in terms of a majority of votes does become, in effect, the policy of this. And I think that this map is sufficiently clear. And notice the map does allow certain corners for 7 to 15 levels. One of the things, are there specific height recommendations within the map as well? Because I know John, for example, has talked about on the corner of Washington and Lynn calls for 9 stories. Is that somewhere else on that or not?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, he may be referring to the yield analysis portion of the comp plan. So with each sub-district, the consultants kind of took a stab at what redevelopment may look like in terms of, how much new square footage of retail versus residential could be absorbed in the community. And they assigned estimated heights to various properties. That's not part of this map. That's elsewhere in the plan.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So the map is part of the comprehensive plan, the yield analysis images are
So we're not binding ourselves to the yield analysis. So we have one undeveloped corner, we're allowing up to 15 stories, which I don't think anyone is wanting to go more than that. We have another corner where we're allowing ourselves to go up to 15 stories. I mean, I guess there's not that many more parcels that there's maybe one area that I see on Washington that could be affected by this, but we're still looking at a robust development opportunity. We had a concept within that framework that I think actually did try to adopt the comprehensive plan. There was a proposal that made it a couple years ago. So I guess I don't see what the controversy here is. We only have one more parcel, and we're essentially honoring this document. And if the worst, thing that we commit is that we're honoring this public process, however imperfect it may have been, that's, I think, where I come on this. So I support honoring that original vision. And I think really what we have down here, it's not a question of whether what we understand or not. It's a policy preference. I think the two great architects or urban theorists of John Gale versus Edward Glaser. There's the human scale versus the high rise. That's an active debate. Jim and I obviously prefer more of the human scale or smaller developments. Other people prefer the high-rise. That's an active debate, and I think under this concept, we're going to get both. So I think that's what this, and I think that's what the developers or the developers of this plan were trying to accomplish, is to allow these sort of competing visions. Not one would predominate over the other, but both essentially would be able to flourish, and I think that map accomplishes that. So that's why I support keeping the map in.
Let me add 2 brief points, Susan. I know you have a reaction to all that, but the first is I think I want to thank Jeff and the staff for preparing this new map. For me, at least, it really helps me understand how this policy would be likely to play out, and about the fact that there are clearly sites that we would say, by a matter of policy, we could permit anything between 7 and 15 stories on those sites, et cetera, based on the map's features. And also to know where the contributing structures are, where the eligible structures are, and all that. I think that's really very helpful, for me, at least. The second thing I'd like to mention is I think the real issue, given that basic notion of following the map, is when would we provide exceptions?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our debate probably needs to go next. And on that point, I guess I'd like to say there are textual features in the material that Wendy provided us that I'd like to amend slightly, but we don't have time, I think, today to go through those textual things. What I would be happy to do is prepare a version that contains some textual amendments, so it's proposed textual amendments, so it's very clear what I'm proposing. And what I would propose doesn't go away from the idea that exceptions can be considered and could be provided. But I think what I would propose would make it clearer about when those kinds of exceptions would come to play.
I remember now what my question was on this map. Is the U.S. Bank building a historical landmark or individually eligible?
Building is.
Yeah, a portion of it is. I think you see the corner there. The one just to the right of that is a newer addition that would not be. And then that, their surface lot is, I'm not sure why the map ended up like this, but their surface lot's really broken into 2 different height categories there. They've got the 7 to 15 and then the 4 to 6 maybe. It's hard for me to see distinguish those colors. So, that's one of those projects. If and when that one comes forward, I don't think you're going to see it develop where you'll have 15 on the corner and then right behind it you'd have a smaller. It's probably all going to be of relatively the same scale. So there's a couple of nuances here. The Hot House Yoga building's noted on there as one story that clearly was a mistake. It was probably as they were looking at existing conditions, they mapped it and they just forgot to touch that property again. So there's that exception piece is going to be key, not only to address some of those nuances, but for anything else that comes forward that may be of interest that's outside of these ranges, whether it be higher or lower, because when you reference this plan, unless the policy says different, if it calls for 7 to 15 stories and someone wants to do a 3-story, at least we would interpret that as working both ways, because you're really trying to achieve the scale of the map. So.
Yeah, but nobody's going to apply for a TIF for a 3-story building. Maybe downtown. I don't think it would happen.
Well, I would say, given where we are, time-wise, and Jim has some interest in giving some edits to some of the language that we have in front of us, I'll just kind of reiterate where I'm at, and then I think probably we're at a place that we can leave it for today. Again, going back to the map, and I just want to reiterate, we've been in this process for a year. We had the focus group starting last fall. I was reviewing our minutes and stuff this from March or whenever. We really kind of got going with all of this. So there's been a lot of discussion. The key point, I guess, Rockne, where I would say that I disagree with you, and to me this is just a fundamental issue, is that we are talking about putting a regulation in place tied to a map that I do not believe did have that kind of public scrutiny before it went into the comp plan. And so to tie something so significant as where we would give TIF on what pieces of property and at what heights that we would be willing to do that. So codifying that and tying it to a map in and of itself, which I do not believe had the necessary public scrutiny and discussion prior to it going into that comp plan, I think that is a fatal flaw to me in being able to support the change in TIF policy in tying it to that. I mean, I look at one building, and it's the one I've mentioned repeatedly, is the Mearden Supel Downer law firm building. I mean, it's on a corner, both on a street corner as well, it goes all the way to the alley, all right? It's kitty corner from a 12-story building or whatever. And we're going to restrict that to, what was it, 5 to 7 stories?
4 to 6, I think.
4 to 6 or whatever. Yeah, 4 to 6, 4 to 6 stories. And again, if a huge part of the consultant's decision in mapping it that way was also that they were taking into account parking issues and or other things that I believe we will be looking at once we're done. I would hope that we're looking at once we're done with the north side parking. Then to me, we're codifying something that in a year or two may make absolutely no sense. And I just can't support it that way.
Understood. If we proceed with drafting a form-based code, that would provide us with a way of amending the map, basically, and providing greater clarity that could be used. So I kind of think about this as until such time as we adopt a form-based code for the downtown.
I look at that as Congress repealing Obamacare without a replacement.
Well, yeah, okay.
I mean.
All right. So then the other thing I wanted to ask you, Susan, is what would you recommend as an alternative to using this map as a way of exercising council discretion about achieving the objectives of the comprehensive plan?
I don't think it should be tied to height at all.
Okay.
I think it needs to be, we've already talked about language that, if you're on a historic block, it needs to preserve that historic feel of that block. I mean, Jeff and I have had discussion about, the property that's for sale on the Ped Mall, and, how bad we would feel basically if somebody came in and tore that down and, and they could do that if they're not asking for financial assistance of the city. Mm-hmm. But if they were coming to us, then yes, we've got some control over some things. I think we have that with the language about, preserving the historical context of a block, things like that. I don't feel that it should be tied to specific heights.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It seems to me that
I think that's a fundamental difference that we've got.
Yeah, I understand. I think what we have by using the map is greater clarity for developers about what this council would approve. And what we would have if we pursued your alternative is complete ambiguity. So, well, I don't want to exaggerate too much, greater ambiguity. So I understand that's not something that developers would like. So, we have a difference of opinion. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on then to staff report. Do you have anything, Wendy? I know you knew this was going to be a long agenda, so you necessarily have a lot.
Didn't prepare anything.
Okay. Anything additional from the committee?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Cole, second by Throgmorton. All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you very much.